Have you ever felt like life was playing tricks on you? You live with kindness. You do not scheme. You always choose the gentler path, yet somehow, you are the one who ends up getting hurt. When you yield, people see you as weak. When you help others, they doubt your intentions. You live with sincerity, but often find yourself the loneliest soul in a noisy world. If all of this is wearing you out, know this: you are not lost. You are simply walking a path few dare to take. The path of pure-hearted souls being shaped by the universe to become a light. Not just for themselves, but for others too. In today's video, we will explore 9 profound spiritual tests, challenges that not everyone encounters. But if you feel like life is testing you more than others, then maybe, just maybe, you are ready to shed your old self and step into the most authentic version of who you truly are. These are not just lessons pulled from Buddhist texts, they are deep, soul-level truths that can make you look back on your pain with a whole new heart. In the journey of living with sincerity in a skeptical world, the very first challenge faced by a pure heart is misunderstanding. It is a pain that does not come from physical wounds, but from the distorted ways others perceive your intentions. It happens when you do something good, only to be accused of having a hidden agenda. When you choose silence to keep the peace, yet people think you are hiding something. When you open your heart to help someone, only to receive gossip and suspicion in return. The pain is not in being misunderstood. It is in feeling betrayed by the very kindness you believed in. Some people choose to defend themselves. Others withdraw, but very few recognize the deeper truth, that the root of their suffering lies in the need to be understood. In a small village nestled deep in the misty mountains, there lived a man named Wei. He made a living picking wild tea and offering it freely to anyone who passed by. Every morning, he climbed steep hillsides to gather young tea buds nurtured by fog and stillness. There was something extraordinary about his tea. Just one sip could calm the soul, melting away anxiety like steam rising from the cup. Wei never sold tea, never asked questions, and never tried to heal anyone. He simply brewed tea, quietly offered it, and nodded in silence. But this very simplicity began to stir suspicion. People believed no one would give away something for free without a reason. Some spread rumors that he laced the tea with drugs. Others claimed he was pretending to be poor to gain people's trust. Even an old woman he had once helped during a serious illness turned her back on him. Believing the whispers, they smashed his tea table, poured out the boiling water, and hurled accusations, calling him a fraud. Wei did not argue. He did not resist. He simply bowed his head and thanked each person who had misunderstood him. Then quietly packed up his things and left. He said, "Thank you for helping me realize that I was still attached to the desire to be seen rightly." Today's lesson is more precious than any tea I have ever brewed. His words stunned the crowd and quietly planted a seed in their hearts. Later, many of them, when faced with injustice in their own lives, would remember Wei's calm presence, his unblaming bow, and they would begin to ask themselves, "Have I ever wrongly judged someone?" From that story, we can see that misunderstanding is not something we need to fix in others. It is a mirror that helps us examine the ego within ourselves. The Buddha taught, clinging to the need to be understood is a subtle form of pride. When you let go of the desire to be recognized, you stop living for the opinions of others and start living for your own inner peace. You do not need to win in the eyes of others. You only need to win against the storm in your own heart when you are misunderstood. That is when you become truly free. A heart that is gentle enough to love without needing acknowledgement, wide enough to forgive even in doubt, and bright enough to remain unshaken by the shadows of misunderstanding. That is a heart that has passed the first test of the spiritual path. Misunderstanding does not diminish you. It simply reveals whether you are living for truth, or still chasing the approval of the crowd. When you can bow your head and sincerely thank the one who wronged you, you are no longer a victim. You are someone learning the lesson of awakening. When someone lives with a pure heart and always puts kindness first, they face not only external challenges, but also a deeper, more persistent pain, the pain of being misunderstood. The world does not always work according to instant karma. Sometimes, sincerity, gentleness, and humility are the very things that invite suspicion. The sting of being misunderstood is not found in the words of others, but in the heartbreak of having your goodness returned not with gratitude, but with doubt. Some try to explain themselves. Others fight to prove their innocence. But a rare few learn to bow and thank life itself for giving them the chance to see into the root of their suffering, their attachment to being validated, understood, and justified. There is an old Eastern tale about a man named Wei, a hermit who lived along a narrow path between two fog-covered mountains. He owned no wealth, held no fame, and asked for nothing. Each day, he climbed through thickets of wild tea, gathered leaves kissed by morning mist, and brewed tea for anyone passing by. No questions, no stories, no need for repayment. Just a quiet smile and a warm cup of tea. Strangely, everyone who drank his tea felt an inner peace, as if their worries were cleansed in the rising steam. Over time, people began to call him the silent healer. But as word spread of his peaceful gift, suspicion crept in. Some claimed he put something in the tea to control people's minds. Others whispered that he was a sorcerer in disguise. Some believed he was secretly building power by earning people's trust. A few merchants even felt threatened, because while they sold bottled water with empty promises, Wei gave away serenity for nothing. They began weaving false accusations and spreading fear throughout the village. Even the old woman he once helped recover from severe joint pain, the one who brought him food every evening and called him son, began to question. Why would anyone give so much without wanting something back? She asked herself one cold, rainy night. One morning, she joined the angry crowd, not to drink tea, but to condemn. They flipped his table, spilled his water, knocked over his teapot, and hurled cruel words. What do you want from us? What are you plotting? Who is ever that good without a hidden agenda? Wei stood silent in the storm of voices. When they were done shouting, he bowed deeply, smiled, and said, "Thank you, everyone. Today, I learned that I still cling to the desire to be understood. Thank you for helping me see that. No anger, no defense, no retreat." He simply cleaned up the shattered tea set, packed a few belongings, and walked away. No one knows where he went. But afterward, a strange emptiness settled over that path, not from the absence of tea, but from the absence of a presence that once made people reflect on themselves. That story is not just the tragedy of a misunderstood man. It is a mirror for each of us to reflect on ourselves. Are we living with kindness because we truly want to be kind? Or because we want to be seen as good people? Is our discomfort with being misunderstood a result of pain? Or is it our ego reacting to not being seen the way we hoped? In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a very subtle layer of the ego that spiritual practitioners must confront. It is the invisible self. The attachment to the image of being good in the eyes of others. When Wei bowed and thanked those who insulted him, it was not submission, it was liberation. He was no longer bound by what others thought of him, because he had realized that his true value did not lie in external validation. Letting go of the need to be understood is not easy. But if one day, you can thank the person who wrongly accused you with a peaceful smile, then on that very day, you are no longer a victim. You have stepped into the first lesson on the spiritual path, the lesson of freedom from the ego that thirsts for recognition. In the silence of not needing to prove anything, you become as light as morning mist, as grounded as a mountain, and as serene as a cup of tea infused with dawn's first light. There is a kind of pain that has no shape, no blood, and no sound, yet it can gnaw at the heart more deeply than anything else. It is the pain of being misunderstood, especially when the misunderstanding arises from the very kindness you gave. Those who live with goodness often believe that if they treat the world with sincerity, the world will respond with the same gentleness. But life does not work in such a simple equation. There are times when you offer help and people assume you are trying to gain something. Times when you choose silence to avoid conflict, only to be accused of hiding something shameful. Moments when you give your love and care wholeheartedly, only to be met with doubt, gossip, and twisted words about your pure intentions. In those moments, one can begin to feel lost. What did I do wrong? Is it even worth being a good person? Do people only believe in what is fake and no longer trust what is real? Those questions rise like undercurrents in the heart, exhausting you, not because you were insulted, but because you were not understood. But if you look closely, you will see that the suffering does not come from others' words. It comes from the silent attachments within you, the need to be seen rightly, the craving to be recognized as good, the longing to maintain a certain image of yourself in the eyes of the world. An old tale tells of a man named Wei who once lived quietly along a winding mountain path near the ancient borders of China. He ran a small tea stall made of bamboo, where he brewed water, steeped tea, and offered it to anyone who passed by, expecting nothing in return. The uniqueness of his tea was not in its aroma or technique, but in the way he served it, with full presence and compassion. People would sit, take a sip, and feel their burdens quietly dissolve, without knowing why. Over time, his tea hut became a quiet refuge for weary souls. But as word spread, trouble began. Some local merchants, seeing him as an invisible threat to their profits, began spreading harsh rumors. Free tea must have something hidden in it. He is using tea to control minds. No poor man gives so generously. He must have a secret plan. At first, these were only whispers, but they spread like fire in dry grass. People who once drank his tea with gratitude began to keep their distance. Even a woman he had once saved during a serious illness, who used to call him her benefactor, started to doubt him. Poisoned by the warnings that echoed around her, one morning, a crowd gathered, not to enjoy tea, but to interrogate and accuse. What are you hiding? Who are you really? Why do you give without asking for anything back? They poured out his tea, smashed his kettle, overturned the small cups on the table. Wei simply stood there, silent, his eyes neither angry nor sad. When it was over, he bowed deeply and said in a voice as gentle as the wind, "Thank you for helping me see that I was still clinging to the need to be understood. Thank you for giving me the chance to let that go." The story ends with him walking away. No one knows where he went. But afterward, those who once accused him began to feel a strange emptiness. Some started to recall the stillness of his tea hut, the calmness in his eyes even when misunderstood, and realized they had perhaps lost something sacred. It was the way he did not justify himself, did not fight back, and did not cling to his reputation, that became the greatest lesson of all. In Buddhist teaching, this is called egolessness in honor, letting go of the image of the good self, and returning to the peace that comes from within. True freedom does not come from being loved by the crowd. It comes from no longer being controlled by praise or blame. Real liberation is not when you are vindicated, but when you no longer need to be. With that compassionate bow, Wei stepped beyond the bounds of words, of judgment, and of the ego's craving to be seen rightly. And in that, he went further than anyone else. When you live with a pure heart in a world full of doubt, being misunderstood is almost inevitable. But if you keep trying to explain yourself, trying to prove you are not what others say, you will always be trapped by the narratives others create. Only when you can smile under suspicious eyes, only when you can be grateful for misunderstandings as mirrors reflecting the parts of you that have not yet let go, only then do you begin to live in true inner freedom. That is the first lesson, one that anyone on the spiritual path must face. Learning to release the need to be understood, and returning to the stillness within yourself. A stillness that needs no recognition, fears no rejection, a presence so pure, like a simple cup of tea, that it becomes the only proof of a soul already set free. There are moments in life when you stand in a crowded room and still feel disconnected. When you talk with your closest people yet sense that no one truly understands your inner world. When you try to connect, but feel like you come from another planet. This is not ordinary loneliness, but a sacred isolation often experienced by souls whose consciousness is expanding. That feeling is like taking the first steps on a deserted trail while the crowd remains lost in busy streets. You do not resent them, nor do you feel superior. You simply cannot pretend to care about what excites others. Conversations about possessions, gossip, competition, fleeting entertainments, or repetitive scripts of surface living. While they immerse themselves in the world's party, your soul longs to quiet down and listen to something deeper, like a faint calling from a place you've never been but strangely feel at home. This difference comes not from separation, but from an inner transformation, from beginning to ask questions that no one around seems interested in anymore. What is the true meaning of life? Is there something above success and failure? Why do I feel empty even when everything outwardly seems fine? Long ago, in a large monastery high in the snowy mountains of Tibet, there was a young novice named Tenzin. He did not stand out for mastery of ritual or remembering scriptures, but for his dreamy gaze toward distant peaks where heaven and earth merged. During his 3 years at the monastery, he memorized sutras, performed rituals, and practiced meditation with his brothers, yet he felt an ever-growing emptiness in his heart. While senior monks debated monastic rules, meditation stages, and spiritual status. Tenzin wondered, why must I attain something instead of living deeply in this moment? Why does compassion vanish in contests of spiritual progress? If enlightenment is freedom, why do I feel bound by the path leading to it? Those questions were not welcomed. His teachers advised him not to think too much, insisting that practice is to follow in the footsteps of those who came before. But Tenzin's heart no longer settled in established patterns. Each time he looked out the window at sunlight on snowy slopes or heard wind whispering through pine trees, he felt something urging him to leave everything behind and return to an unnamed form of truth. One winter night, after months of inner turmoil, Tenzin asked his teacher, Master Labang, for permission to leave the monastery and spend a year in a solitary retreat in the mountains. He did not wish to leave to become someone else, only to listen to himself, to listen to life unfiltered by teachings. Master Labang looked into his young disciple's eyes and nodded, offering only one instruction. You must promise that after 1 year, you will return and tell me what you have learned about the difference between loneliness and silence. The next day, Tenzin took a few simple belongings and climbed to a mountain apex where only wind, snow, and absolute silence reigned. He lived in a small cave with no schedule, no bells, no companions, only breath and the sky changing with the seasons. The first days were a challenge. Silence laid bare all mental attachments. Cold stirred memories long buried. But gradually, he ceased to fight the stillness. He began to hear things unheard in the monastery. The wingbeat of a bird in dawn's mist. The soft cry of a forgotten inner self. The gentle smile of unnameable wisdom. Tenzin realized that the isolation he feared was actually a doorway to deeper connection, one without words or consent, yet still able to feel kindness from sky, stone, wind, and the silent life surrounding him. After a year passed, Tenzin returned to the monastery. No one noted any outward change. But Master Labang immediately perceived something in his steps, slow, steady, and no longer seeking. What have you learned? The master asked. Tenzin folded his hands, bowed, and said, I have understood that loneliness is when we separate from life, while silence is when we dissolve into it. In the monastery, I felt lonely because I tried to be like everyone else. On the mountain, I was alone but not lost, because I could simply be myself. The master said nothing, only smiled softly, knowing his student had entered a level of insight no doctrine could convey. In everyday life, many of us are undergoing this lesson unknowingly. You may be the only one in your friend group no longer interested in pride or competition. You may be the person in your family wanting to discuss deeper meaning while others focus on status, success, and unquestioned traditions. You may feel alien within your own community because your heart seeks a path unseen by others. But this does not mean you are lost. It may be a sign that you are entering a spiritual transformation. Like Tenzin, you don't need to go far. Just turn inward, long enough, quiet enough, to hear the voice of your true self guiding you. Your difference is not a burden, but a gift, meant not to be displayed, but to be silently sown, so that one day, when someone else walks the path you once trod, they will sense a light there, the light of someone who left no footprints, only presence. The second lesson does not ask you to be like others. but teaches you to accept your difference as a sacred part of your journey. When you stop seeking approval, you will find resonance, not from the outside world, but from the tranquility within. And that is when silence becomes not absence of sound, but the presence of a silent, all-encompassing compassion that will never abandon you. One day, while working, Kenji heard a faint crack from the kiln, a sound he had never heard in his lifelong craft. At first, the crack was as fine as a hairline, but within a few weeks, it spread until the kiln became unusable. Repairing it required an enormous cost that Kenji simply did not have. He was forced to sell off his most prized possessions, his ancestral materials, and even the treasured antique glaze he had always held dear. Yet despite his efforts, he still could not raise enough money to restore his pottery workshop to what it once was. Not long after, a sudden fire swept through and consumed the entire studio, leaving nothing but dark ashes. Kenji stood silent amidst the ruins, his heart collapsing with the charred bricks. All he had safeguarded for a lifetime, all that had been passed down through 8 generations, was reduced to dust. The pain was not just a material loss, it was losing part of his identity. Without being the potter, who was he anymore? While he knelt, gathering broken shards of glaze in silence, an elderly man appeared, a Zen master named Yamamoto, known for his silent tea ceremonies high in the mountains. The master sat beside Kenji, asking nothing but one simple question: "Do you know what you truly created in that workshop?" Kenji looked puzzled and replied, "I created beauty. I shaped clay to serve and nourish beauty within people's hearts." The Zen master nodded slowly and said, "That is true, but what you truly created is attachment." After a pause, he continued, "You loved pottery so deeply that you believed you could not live without it. You saw the kiln, the glaze, the workshop, as part of yourself. So when they were gone, you felt you had lost your very body. But tell me, when you teach a poor child pottery, do you need anything besides clay, water, and your 2 hands?" Kenji remained silent for a moment. Then it struck him. Even without a kiln, without a workshop, without money, he still had his hands, a heart that loved beauty, and the ability to inspire others. What was truly essential could not be burned. It had never existed in something external. From that moment on, Kenji began teaching pottery in village courtyards, under trees, in small temples. He needed only a bit of clay, a bucket of water, and his hands. Children gathered around him not only to learn to shape clay, but to learn how to love simple things in their hands. His students eventually became renowned artisans. Yet all said, "We did not only learn pottery, we learned how to live." From the ashes of his old studio, something bloomed, not from the earth, but from the human heart. The third lesson reminds us, when life takes away everything we once considered most important, it is not destruction, but a form of rebirth. Only when what no longer serves the soul's growth is removed can space be created for light to shine in. Just as a cup must be empty to receive tea, the heart must be vacant enough to hold a miracle never before known. What was lost may have been precious, but if it had to go, it means you were ready for something greater. Emptiness is not lack, but opportunity. An opportunity to return to your essence, to pure creative power not dependent on tools or circumstances. Like Kenji, Sometimes we must be made empty-handed so we can see that our true wealth was never countable or measurable. It resides in a beating heart, in hands trembling with emotion, in the ability to give beauty, even when nothing remains in your hands. That is when you understand. Loss does not end you. It ends an old version and opens a new, purer version, stronger, freer, and closer to your spiritual purpose than ever before. In each of our lives, there may be moments when everything seems to collapse. Things that once supported us, gave us pride, comfort, and defined who we were, suddenly shatter for no apparent reason. We lose a job after years of dedication, lose loved ones despite giving all our heart, lose health, money, reputation, and eventually lose trust in ourselves. These losses do not come from carelessness or mistakes. They come quietly, as if the universe gently withdraws pieces of our life one by one. Without pity, some fight back, some sink into despair, others try to hold on, but few pause in the midst of ruins and ask the courageous question: if this is not an end, then what is it preparing me for? Because in many deep spiritual traditions, there is a belief that before a soul can receive the grand gift of destiny, it must first be made completely empty, so it might receive something sacred it never dared to imagine. In an ancient Japanese village nestled among tranquil hills, lived a potter named Kenji, renowned not only for his masterful craft, but for his open heart and soul that loved beauty to its core. His workshop, inherited through 8 generations, held history in every lump of clay, every mold, every glaze. Kenji lived simply, caring not for fame. He poured his love into making vessels that, though functional, radiated a silent beauty that calmed anyone who gazed upon them. When curious village children came by, he did not chase them away. Instead, he taught them how to shape clay, not to become potters, but to understand patience, care, and deep listening between humanity and the inanimate. Then one day, the old traditional kiln cracked. Despite efforts, Kenji could not save it. The fissures spread deep into its foundation, as though time demanded back something that had belonged to humanity far too long. Pottery became impossible. With no kiln, he could no longer fire creations. Kenji had to progressively sell his treasures to pay costs, then tools. Then finally his home beside the studio. Just when tragedy seemed complete, a big fire from the village reached the workshop and consumed everything remaining, from the painting his father drew years ago to the last pottery Kenji had crafted. The next morning, Kenji stood among the ashes. He did not cry. He simply sat on a blackened stone, looked at the pale gray sky, and felt as though he, too, had turned to dust. At that moment, an elderly man appeared, Yamamoto, a tea master who lived in solitude high in the mountains, rarely leaving his hermitage. Without pitying words, he sat beside Kenji, took a chipped tea bowl from his robe, and said, "Do you know why the best tea should always be drunk from an imperfect bowl?" Kenji shook his head. Yamamoto continued, "Because the chip reminds the drinker that true beauty does not need wholeness. The chip creates space for light to enter." Then he looked deeply into Kenji's eyes and said, "You think you have lost everything, but in fact, you have only lost what wasn't truly necessary. The most important thing, you have never lost." Kenji still did not fully understand. Yamamoto placed his hand gently on Kenji's scratched hands and asked, "When you teach a poor child to shape clay, do you need a kiln?" Kenji quietly shook his head. "Then what allows these hands to transform clay into something beautiful?" "Presence. Love," Kenji whispered. Yamamoto smiled, rose, and walked away without another word. From that day forward, Kenji wandered across the land carrying only a small bag of clay, a bucket of water, and his calloused hands. In every village he visited, he taught people how to shape clay, how to breathe life into form, how to find tranquility amid the monotonous spin of the pottery wheel. Though he no longer had a pottery workshop, he became a sower of inspiration, awakening in hundreds the pure joy of creation. His students later established new studios, carrying his techniques and spirit far and wide, always remembering his instruction. Pottery is not for making objects. Pottery is for returning home. His loss, from external eyes, appeared tragic, but viewed from within, it was a birth. The third lesson teaches that loss is not an ending, but a clearing. When everything collapses, do not rush to conclude life is unjust. Ask yourself instead, did I truly need what just vanished? Or was I just used to having it? Often, what dissolves is our old ego, tight definitions of self, dependence on form, and a mistaken belief that our worth depends on possessions. But when everything is burned away, what remains is the truest essence, like flames stripping bark to reveal solid wood. We need far less to restart than we think. Just a soul with its fire still glowing, warm hands, and enough humility to realize we have never lost what truly belongs to us. Our deepest gift, the ability to create beauty, not from external tools, but from emptiness. And emptiness, when truly understood, becomes fertile ground where light can be planted. On the path of spiritual practice, or simply growing through a turbulent life, one of the deepest and most unpredictable challenges is the sense of abandonment by the very things we trusted. When prayers go unanswered, kindness yields no result. When all we believed to be right suddenly loses its power. There are moments when, despite living honestly, adhering to moral principles, sowing righteous seeds, life returns only silence. In such times, a subtle yet powerful feeling arises. Has life turned its back on me? Has God, the universe, or karma forgotten me? The pain then lies not in specific events but in the sense that all we clung to, beliefs, morality, hope, no longer holds value. Yet in that darkest hour, when external light fades, a rare opportunity emerges, the chance to live not by external reward, but by unconditional faith, the only thing that can lead us through a night with no answers. In a small temple deep in the ancient Thai forest lived a young monk named Niran, expected to one day become abbot because of his sharp intellect and compassion from an early age. Niran learned quickly, practiced diligently, taught clearly, and was respected by the entire village as a genuine practitioner. Yet within him was a silent ache. The more he practiced, the more he studied, the deeper he went, the farther enlightenment seemed. While other meditators reported visions of light, celestial bells, and absolute peace, he felt only endless loops of doubt and silence. At first, he assumed he lacked effort, so he increased meditation time, reduced food and sleep, and completely withdrew. Yet no matter what he did, he only met barren emptiness. Some nights, kneeling in the forest, he whispered to the sky, "If there is something wrong, please show me. If I have lost my way, let me know." But only insects sang, and pale moonlight shimmered. Doubt eventually shifted from himself to the teachings themselves. He wondered, is everything just an illusion painted by human fear of impermanence? Are we chasing something that does not exist? That doubt led him to leave the temple, carrying only a begging bowl and saffron robes. Wandering as one without direction, he no longer sought enlightenment, nor feared hell, nor desired heaven. He simply walked, as if life had nothing to lose. One summer afternoon, he passed a barren, long-abandoned field and sat beneath a lone acacia tree. Nearby, an old stooped man was turning soil, pulling weeds. The monk was invited in for water, and the man continued his work without complaint. When asked why he farmed such arid land, he smiled and said, "I do not plant believing there will be a harvest. I plant because if I do not, my heart goes empty. Tilling the earth each day reminds me that I am still here." Niran fell silent. It was not a teaching, not lofty wisdom, but it reached the deepest part of him, what he thought he had lost. The old man demanded nothing from life, expected no recognition, sought no mysticism, yet fully inhabited each presence without condition or question. That awakened within him a different faith, one that no longer depended on outcome, no longer leaned on response from the universe, but was a pure trust in life breathing through each barefoot step. Each sip of water, each nameless but abundant action. Later, Niran returned to his old temple, but he was no longer the same. He no longer lectured much, nor tried to interpret scripture, nor debated insight. Each day, he swept the courtyard, brewed tea, sat quietly under a Bodhi tree, as if silently conversing with something invisible yet closer than ever. When asked why he returned after months of doubt, he smiled gently and said, "Because I realized I do not need answers to continue. I do not need validation to walk forward." Sometimes the universe seems silent not because it rejects us, but because it is teaching us to love what is right without demanding recognition. The fourth lesson is a reminder for those journeying through spiritual darkness when what once seemed clear becomes unclear. When prayers yield no echoes, when old faiths crumble, do not rush to conclude failure. Perhaps you are being led to a deeper faith, one that requires no reward, no miracle, no external confirmation. In the spacious silence where no comforting voice rises, your soul learns to stand unmoved without support. Real faith is not believing when everything flows, but believing even when every sign contradicts it. Like a flower blooming in a desert, like the old man tilling barren soil, like a monk continuing to sit in meditation amid doubt. The steadfastness in silence is the truest expression of a soul purifying to return to its unnamed source of light. That is the faith no longer waiting for reply, yet strong enough to keep walking, because the journey itself is sacred. In the invisible stream of spiritual trials faced by a good-hearted soul, there comes a silent yet deeply tangled phase. You do everything right, living kindly, maintaining discipline, thinking well, speaking truth, acting compassionately. Yet the outcomes starkly contrast with your expectations. Instead of peace, you feel pushed to the margins of life. Instead of love, you receive coldness or exploitation. Instead of growth, you find yourself suppressed, overwhelmed, or completely forgotten. Your efforts are not only unappreciated, but they make you question your path. Am I living wrongly? Am I too naive, too soft in an unfair world? This wound doesn't stem from failure. It comes from the feeling that kindness itself has been abandoned, dismissed, a feeling both very real, very deep, and very painful. But right there an invisible classroom opens, the class of unconditional faith, where you do not act kindly for rewards, but because kindness is your nature. You live rightly not for others' approval, but because denying it would be denying yourself. In the 18th century, in a coastal village in southern China, lived a healer named Chen Bok, famed for miraculous hands. He could feel mood from a pulse, prescribe medicine without books, simply touching a patient's forehead to know the imbalance of energy. Yet what earned him people's respect wasn't talent, but compassion, never charging a poor patient, never refusing anyone, midnight or mealtime. People believed he was a bodhisattva reborn, a divine healer, so they built shrines and statues to worship him while he lived. But that reverence turned into suspicion when several people who drank his prescriptions became worse, even died. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he had aged and lost skill. Others accused him of secret poisons or dark arts. Within a single rainy season, his lifelong reputation crumbled. People turned their backs, destroyed his medicine room, burned his shrine. He lost his home, his honor, even students who once called him master as father. In the following months, he lived in a straw hut near a cemetery, alone, gathering leaves, cooking medicine for himself as age and illness weighed on him. One day, a young woman knocked on his hut door, holding her child, pale and convulsing with fever. All clinics had refused. The mother came to the man once considered a poison doctor in disguise. Chen Bok, skinny and trembling, still methodically prepared herbs, boiled medicine, and sat by the child through the night, changing cloths, massaging, transmitting energy. When the child recovered, he neither rejoiced nor spoke a word. The mother knelt, tears mixing with the night rain. He breathed one sentence softly like wind. I did not save the child. It was the good inside me, though trampled by life, still refusing to die. The story later reached others, but he never returned to healing professionally. He accepted no new students, wrote no books, offered no explanations, made no defense. He lived silently like the last leaf in a forest, essence without form. When he passed away, his hut held only a few ceramic bowls, a handwritten notebook of prescriptions, and a handful of herbal seeds. The woman he once saved planted those seeds into a herb garden called the Silent Garden. No signboard, no fees, just an open space where sick people could rest under trees and receive medicine from anonymous hands. The fourth lesson is a test of the soul. Can you keep living with integrity when no one sees? Can you remain faithful to your nature when life strips away all the rewards once tied to it? True faith isn't practiced by those honored, but by those abandoned, misunderstood, and trampled. Your heart doesn't need praise or triumph. It just must not die in the darkness. Even when no one believes in you. Truth doesn't lie with the masses. And it doesn't falter by applause or slander. Truth is when you find courage to do what is right, even if it brings no benefit to yourself. That is when you touch a higher spiritual level, where goodness ceases to be a choice and becomes a natural state. Solid like a rock in storm. Unmoved, not needing defense, because real goodness protects itself. Anyone who holds compassion amid suffering, who retains kindness amid gossip, has found strength no one can take away, the power of a heart not tainted by hatred. Even while standing in the mud, in a remote Himalayan border region lived a nun named Tenzin. Born to a wealthy aristocratic family but renounced everything, wealth, status, arranged marriage, to become a nun at 19. She lived in solitude in a snowy cave, without money or worldly contact, sustaining herself on meditation, chanting, and rare dried vegetables offered by villagers. For over a decade she did not descend from the mountains, spoke only a few words daily, and never complained. Villagers revered her as an incarnation of Tara, the compassionate goddess. But in her 15th year of ordination, a scandal erupted. A young woman from the village, pregnant out of wedlock and afraid to name the father, claimed Tenzin had used chanting to enchant and seduce her. The news struck like lightning. Villagers initially disbelieved, but when the woman cried and pleaded, suspicions grew. Some questioned, is she really holy? Or a fake nun hiding sin in piety? Respect turned into outrage. People who once brought food began throwing stones at the cave entrance, calling her a religious mask, the shame of the mountain. The village elder even demanded she leave the region, for her presence had become a communal humiliation. In the invisible stream of spiritual trials that a kind-hearted person must face, there is a quiet but profoundly tangled phase. You do everything right, living with integrity, kindness, restraint, good thoughts, gentle words, compassionate action, yet outcomes contradict your expectations. Instead of peace, you feel pushed to the margins. Instead of love, you receive coldness or exploitation. Instead of growth, you feel suppressed, crushed, or completely forgotten. Your efforts not only go unrecognized but make you doubt your own path. Am I living wrong? Am I too naive, too gentle in an unforgiving world? That wound doesn't come from failure. It comes from feeling that goodness itself has been abandoned, dismissed, a feeling real, deep, and painful. But at that point, an invisible lesson begins. The lesson of unconditional faith. You stop doing good for reward, and do it because kindness is your nature. You live rightly, not seeking validation, but because to deny it would be denying your true self. In the 18th century, in a coastal village in southern China, lived a healer named Chen Bok, famed for miraculous hands. He could feel mood from your pulse, prescribe medicines without books. Just a touch to your forehead would reveal imbalance. Yet what earned respect was not talent, but compassion, never charging the poor, never refusing anyone. Even at midnight, people believed he was a bodhisattva reborn, a divine healer. So shrines and statues sprang up while he was still alive. But that respect turned into suspicion when several patients worsened or even died after taking his prescriptions. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he had lost skill with age. Others accused him of secret poisons or dark arts. In a single rainy season, his reputation collapsed. People destroyed his medicine room, burned his shrine. He lost his home, his honor, even students who once treated him like a father. For months, he lived alone in a straw hut near a cemetery. gathering leaves and making medicine for himself in declining health. One day, a young woman knocked with her child, pale, convulsing with fever. Every clinic had refused. She came to the poison doctor in disguise. Chen Bok, frail and trembling, carefully prepared herbs, boiled medicine, and stayed by the child through the night, changing cloths, massaging, transmitting healing energy. When the fever subsided and the child revived, he neither rejoiced nor spoke. The mother knelt, tears mixing with rain. He whispered softly like wind, "I did not save the child. It was the goodness inside me, though trampled by life, still refusing to die." Word of that act spread, but he never returned to healing. He accepted no students, wrote no books, gave no explanations. He lived quietly like the last leaf in a forest, essence without form. When he passed, his hut held only a few ceramic bowls, a handwritten herbal notebook, and a handful of seeds. The woman he healed planted them in a herb garden called the Silent Garden. No sign, no fees, just a place where sick people could rest under trees and receive healing anonymously. The fourth lesson is a test of the soul. Can you remain kind when no one sees? Can you remain true when life strips away every reward? True faith is held not by those honored, but by those abandoned, misunderstood, trampled. Your heart needs no praise. It just must not die in darkness when no one believes in you. Truth doesn't reside in applause or scorn. It is found when you persist in doing what is right, even if it brings no personal gain. That is when you touch a deeper spiritual height, where kindness is not a choice but your natural state. Solid as a rock in a storm, unmoved, needing no defense, because true goodness protects itself. Anyone who holds compassion amidst hardship, keeps kindness through gossip, has found a strength impossible to take away, a heart untouched by hatred, even when standing in mud. In the American South, there lived a woman named Grace, in many ways, mirrored her life. From a young age, Grace was the good kid, helping her mother carry groceries, putting her baby sister to sleep, always giving others the better share of food, never talking back, never upsetting anyone. As she grew older, she became a wife, a mother, a daughter-in-law, fulfilling every role with quiet perfection. Everyone admired her. Her husband had a fiery temper. He often shouted through things, sometimes left home for days. Yet Grace never complained. She never blamed him. She simply cleaned up in silence, waited for him to cool down, then cooked a warm meal like nothing had happened. She believed that a woman's job was to keep the family together, that she had to be patient, forgiving, generous. Neighbors looked up to her as the ideal woman, gentle and enduring, always calm like still water. But no one saw how. On many nights, she hugged her pillow and cried, not because of how she was treated, but because she no longer knew who she was living for. One day, after dropping her kids off at school, Grace suddenly froze in the middle of the grocery store parking lot. She felt breathless, unable to move. All the sounds became distant, all the faces blurred. She sank to the ground, her hands trembling, her heart racing, sweat pouring down her face. Bystanders thought she was having a heat stroke, but the doctor diagnosed it as a panic attack, symptom of long-term depression. When asked when was the last time she did something for herself, Grace couldn't remember, not because she had no time, but because she had lost herself a long time ago. She had always believed that being good meant living for others, but had never once asked herself, if I have no strength left, no feelings, am I truly alive? After that episode, Grace made a decision to spend 1 month alone in Santa Fe, a place she had dreamed of visiting since her teenage years. Not with her husband, not with her kids, not for anyone else, just to live, for once, as a woman who didn't have to play any role. She learned to walk slowly. She sat by the river and listened to the wind. She ate food she liked. She wrote poems she had forgotten. Every morning she practiced breathing. Every evening she journaled. She began to talk to herself like a long-lost friend. In that stillness, Grace discovered something no one had ever taught her. Love does not begin with giving. It begins with returning to yourself. When she came back home after a month of disappearing, Grace was no longer the same woman. She no longer forced herself to smile. She no longer endured in silence. She had learned to set boundaries, to say no, to turn down requests that drained her. Her husband reacted angrily, called her selfish, said she had changed. But for the first time in her life, she felt no guilt for being true to herself. She replied calmly, if caring for myself makes me selfish, maybe I've just been kind to the wrong person for far too long. Her words carried no anger, only clarity. Lesson 6 doesn't come so you stop loving others. It comes to remind you, don't forget to love yourself. No one can pour water into another's cup if their own cup is cracked. No one can keep the world warm if their own flame has burned out. Being good does not mean ignoring your own needs, or enduring until you collapse. A truly good person cares for their inner self, listens to their body, and keeps their heart warm so they can shine light outward. Remember, goodness doesn't demand you sacrifice yourself into stone. In its deepest sense, goodness is living honestly with yourself, loving enough to give, and wise enough to know when to pause, to return, to heal, and then continue sharing with a whole heart. That is the kind of goodness that doesn't fade with time or suffering, a kindness that breathes, that rests, that loves from within. When a kind soul survives life's hardest trials, betrayal, misunderstanding, abandonment, hurt from those they once helped, the pain isn't just in what was lost. It's in the shaking of your faith in goodness itself. There are times when such a person may wonder, is my kindness really meaningful? Did any of it change anyone? Did anyone remember it? When the answer is silence, or worse, ingratitude or backlash, one can retreat into indifference or bitterness. But the highest lesson a mature soul must learn is not how to avoid pain, but how to keep a soft heart after it. Because kindness isn't just an action, it is a state of being. Quietly extending beyond sight, beyond recognition, beyond time. Only when we are serene enough to not seek response, humble enough to not need applause, strong enough to refuse making pain an excuse for hardness, only then does kindness become a lasting quality. In an ancient temple in Kyoto lived an elderly monk named Daichi, not famed for profound teachings or superhuman deeds, but for never turning anyone away. Beggars, criminals, mischievous children. He spoke little, only brewed tea, offered towels or a seat, sometimes silently sitting beside someone in tears. One night, a drunk man stormed into the temple, cursed, destroyed the altar, then lay down to sleep in the main hall. The disciples wanted to expel him. Daichi quietly covered him with a blanket and said, "Even someone who has lost their way needs to feel warmth." The next morning, the man awoke, saw Daichi sweeping leaves, bowed, apologized, and left. No one knew who he was. 10 years later, a middle-aged man brought his son to Daichi, knelt, and said, "Your forgiveness saved me. I stopped drinking, apprenticed in carpentry, built a family, and now have come back to thank you." Daichi smiled and said, "I don't remember that night. But if that kindness still lives today, then it has become a stream of water." The stream he spoke of is not a single act, but the quiet strength of a soul that remains gentle over time. That kindness needs no name, no recognition, but it still exists, still flows, absorbing into life like rain into earth. Even if the sower forgets where they planted the seed, it may still sprout in a hidden corner. That reminds us, not every good deed is remembered, but no true kindness ever disappears. Maybe you once cooked for someone in pain, quietly listened to someone about to fall, held someone's hand amid confusion, forgave when you had every right to punish. Those acts were never meaningless. Even if they forgot, turned away, or never thanked you, the kindness remains a silent mark in life's flow. The seventh lesson is the final maturity of the truly good, to give kindness without expecting return. Because true goodness requires no repayment, it is the natural expression of a soul freed from ego. When you do kindness without measuring, without inscribing, without expecting others to improve, then you become Daichi's stream, silent, patient, flowing through stones, nourishing roots, sustaining life without claiming credit. Don't let ingratitude make you doubt goodness. Don't let wounds harden your heart. Keep your heart soft like a forest stream, like the warmth lingering in an old teacup. Goodness doesn't need remembering. It becomes immortal when it is selfless. As a virtuous soul grows, you will face one of the hardest lessons, to remain kind in silence. To continue offering goodness even when others don't change because of it. It may seem contrary to human nature, because we often believe kindness begets kindness. That compassion makes people better. But reality can defy that expectation. You may help wholeheartedly and still be turned away. You may forgive and be hurt again. You may save someone and be blamed when things go wrong. When that happens too often, bitterness can take hold, not because you regret what you gave, but because your belief in kindness feels wasted. Yet if you can remain courageous enough not to shut your heart, silent enough to look deeper, you will see that the essence of kindness isn't a transactional investment. It is the natural state of your inner freedom. When you live kindly not for anyone, but because you cannot live otherwise, then you step into a rare spiritual depth. Doing good even when there is no visible outcome. No praise, no memory left behind. In Zen legend, there is Ryokan, a hermit monk living simply under a mountain. He never preached, never wrote books, never gathered disciples, never appeared in crowds. His life was utterly simple: morning sweeping leaves, noon gathering vegetables, brewing tea in the afternoon, meditating under moonlight in the evening. Yet the villagers deeply respected him, not for teachings, but for his deep presence in the smallest acts. One time, when he discovered a thief entering his cottage and stealing his thin blanket, Ryokan did not scold or rage. He smiled softly and said, I wish I could have offered him the moonlight too. That wasn't philosophical. It was truth flowing from a heart that no longer resisted life's unfolding. Another story. One winter, Ryokan saw a shivering child begging at the roadside. He took his only coat, wrapped it around the child, silently led them to his hut, and made porridge from the last of his rice. The child slept well and left in the morning, offering no thanks. A week later, the child returned, not to thank, but to steal more rice while Ryokan was meditating. When caught, the child looked up and said coolly, "I fooled you. I pretended to be weak for food. You think you're a bodhisattva?" Ryokan stared at him long, then gently replied, "I don't think I'm a bodhisattva. I only know it was a cold night, and I had a coat." The child froze, then fled into the woods. Years later, after Ryokan died, villagers found a plum tree growing beside his hut. At its base sat a stone inscribed, "I am the one who once insulted you. But your unassuming kindness changed me." Lesson 7 does not ask you to stop being kind. It reminds you, don't forget to care for yourself. No one can pour from a cracked cup. No one can ignite warmth in the world if their own flame has already burnt out. Being a good person doesn't mean ignoring your needs or enduring until you collapse. A truly kind soul listens to its body, protects its heart, and keeps itself whole so that its warmth can spread outward. Kindness should not extinguish you, it should nourish your being. It's about giving with love and knowing when to rest. That is how your kindness remains intact, timeless, undiminished, even amidst hardship. When someone lives kindly and endures suffering, from betrayal, misunderstanding, or hurt by those they've helped, the pain is not only in the losses. It also shakes your faith in goodness. You may wonder, does my kindness matter? Did anyone change because of it? Did they even remember it? When silence or ingratitude answers, it's easy to retreat into bitterness and close your heart. Yet a soul matured by a life learns not how to avoid pain, but how to stay soft-hearted afterward. Kindness becomes more than an act, it becomes your state of being. It flows beyond what is seen or acknowledged. It lives without expectation, without applause, without attachment. Consider Daichi, an aged monk in Kyoto. He welcomed everyone, beggars, children, even a disruptive drunk, never turning anyone away. One night, when the drunk man destroyed the temple's altar and slept on the floor, Daichi covered him with a blanket and said gently, "Even someone lost must feel warmth." Years later, that man returned with his son, bowed, and explained. That act led him to change his life. Daichi replied, "I don't remember that night, but if that kindness still lives today, it has become a stream. That stream is kindness uncompromised by time, still nourishing people even when forgotten." Kindness, like a stream, flows whether or not it is acknowledged. It waters the roots even when the planter forgets where the seed was sown. Lesson 7 teaches, do not let unmet expectations shatter your spirit. Don't measure kindness by results or rewards. Be kind because it is your nature, not to change others nor to earn applause, but to preserve your own softness in a harsh world. Real kindness doesn't stop when people don't deserve it. It only ends when you lose your own heart. There was once a humble herdsman named Dorje in remote Nepal. He helped everyone, carrying supplies during floods, guiding elders, supporting neighbors, without waiting for thanks. When the village was cut off by erosion, he delivered rice and water for days. On the 5th day, he was injured. No one came to help him. When asked if he was disappointed, he simply said, "I didn't help because they would remember. I helped because I could at the time." Years later, remote villagers isolated by snow realized that the survival techniques Dorje had taught, tracking snow, building fires, navigating mist, saved them. His teachings became life itself. The village inscribed his name on a stone. The sower did not wait for harvest. Your kindness may never bloom in your lifetime. It doesn't need applause or gratitude. Like seeds buried deep, kindness waits for the right season to sprout. Lesson 7 reminds us. Let go of needing a return. Keep giving, not to alter others, but to stay true to your essence. When your kindness flows not for recognition but because it is you, and the world responds or doesn't, it no longer matters. You become the warmth in seasons cold, shining simply because you cannot be otherwise. Real kindness doesn't change because others don't. It transforms you, and that is enough. In an ancient village of old China, there lived a physician named So, famous across the region for his herbal healing and mindful meditation methods. People visited him not only for his medical skill, but for his calm demeanor and kindness. He treated the poor and rich alike. He never charged patients, accepting only voluntary offerings. A young man named Luo, suffering from chronic migraines, wandered far and wide to seek So's help. So agreed and taught him mindful eating, breathing, and mental cultivation, no medicine, only consciousness to transform body and mind. Over 3 years, Luo recovered and became So's devoted assistant. Everyone assumed he would stay for life. Yet one day, Luo abruptly left, taking valuable texts So had preserved, with no farewell or thanks. People felt angry on So's behalf, saying he had been betrayed. But So just smiled and replied, "I treated his illness, but not his character. I shared a method, not forced him to be good. If he carried usefulness into his life, then my duty is done." Years later, Luo became a renowned healer in the south. On So's death anniversary, he returned, bearing a book he had authored, detailing everything he learned from So. Inscribed with, "For the one who gave me everything without demand." Only then did the villagers realize, kindness offered without expectation moves in stealth. The power to transform even when you no longer hope. This is not just a story of generosity. It illustrates the power of letting go of the need for outcome. The compassionate must act from an inner emptiness, without demand, without imposing what should change in another through your kindness. If you secretly hope someone will awaken because of your goodness, you fall into the subtle trap of ego, that you are wiser, higher, entitled to direct others' paths. Yet everyone has their own timing, own lessons, own journey. You may be the light someone walks past, or a seed planted deep within, sprouting on a day and place you cannot foresee. Lesson 8 is liberation. Do good, but do not trap anyone in the expectation they must become better. When you live with uncluttered kindness, you remain at ease. Whether they accept or reject it, change or not, remember or forget, you know your actions are authentic. A true good heart does not need visible blossoms to know the seed was well sown. It just knows, "I planted." That is enough. Many people give love quietly as naturally as breathing, but at some point, they feel hollow, not because they run out of kindness, but because they see most of what they gave was forgotten, downplayed, or didn't transform others as expected. If that disappointment isn't seen deeply, it becomes a silent wound, turning kindness into exhaustion, sacrifice into burden, love into conditional debt. The deeper lesson is not how to change others, but to ask yourself, am I kind purely from sincerity? Or from a secret hope others will become better because of me? If your kindness is aimed at changing them, you risk placing its value in their hands, and then you are sure to be disappointed. But if your kindness serves your inner peace, whether they change or not, you retain integrity. In a remote Tibetan village stood a hermit monk named Tenpa, living in a small hermitage on a mountainside. No sign, no fame, no public recognition. Villagers sought his counsel, but he rarely taught doctrine. Instead, he would invite them to the garden, brew tea, sit quietly, and just listen. People said his presence alone was healing, lightening their burdens. A young woman named Dolma, devastated by her family's decline, an alcoholic father, dead mother, criminal brother, came to him almost at her last hope. She lived nearby for 3 months, assisting in the garden, cooking, practicing meditation in silence. Tenpa said little, teaching her simply how to observe breath, wash vegetables mindfully, watch grass sway without needing stillness. Then, quietly, one day, she packed up and left, no promises. Tenpa smiled gently, as though he'd anticipated this departure. 5 years later, no one had heard from Dolma. Some wondered, how many among those he helped truly change? Tenpa answered softly, I do not need them to change to know I loved correctly. One autumn morning, as mist covered the hills, a gentle bell tolled before his hermitage. Dolma returned, holding a self-written book describing her journey from depression into meaningful life. She said barely a word, placing the book on his old tea table, and took a deep bow. Tenpa received it like a golden leaf falling at the perfect time, no surprise. No overwhelming emotion, just a soft, still gaze like a serene pond. This story isn't about praising forgiveness or extolling patience. It's a reminder that some seeds need years to sprout. Some transformations take lifetimes. Some love you give will bloom only after you have moved on. Therefore, Lesson 8 is the inner maturity of the kind soul. Release the expectation that your goodness must yield transformation. No one owes you becoming someone better because of your kindness. Everyone has their own path, their own rhythm. You are a stopping point, a lamp, a teapot in a cold twilight. Do what you believe is right. Then walk on, no looking back, no pushing, no expecting. A big heart is not one that changes others, but one that doesn't close even when none change. When you choose gentleness in chaos, calm in noise, giving when declined, you become the embodiment of pure kindness. No expectations, no ownership, no conditions. Kindness is like a flower's fragrance in the forest. Someone may pass by without noticing, but that doesn't make the fragrance fade. As long as you live that way naturally, you've lived a worthwhile life. When a kind person reaches the end of their trials, through pain, ingratitude, betrayal, even meaninglessness, they face a question no one can avoid: who is responsible? Why do I live kindly and still suffer? Why do I give love and receive coldness? Why does evil seem to triumph while goodness stays invisible, or even disrespected? If this question is not confronted directly, it becomes the seed of bitterness. The kind-hearted begin to compare, withdraw, blame fate, others, and even themselves. But right at that point, a door can open. If they accept one ultimate truth: no one causes my suffering but me. No one causes my disappointment but my hidden expectations. And no one makes life unfair if I'm not demanding fairness from it. The final lesson is not about avoiding pain, but embracing it fully, with stillness and complete responsibility. No evasion, no blame, no running away. Long ago, in a Korean mountain monastery, there lived a Zen master named Heijin. He had lost his family in a land dispute and once vowed revenge. But standing before his enemies, his hands trembled and his heart shook. He fled into solitude for 3 years, speaking scarcely, only observing humanity, nature, and his own wounds. One day he encountered an elder monk by a creek. No one spoke, only water flowed gently. After hours of silence, Heijin cried like a child. The elder did not console him, only said, "Hatred is not outside. It is the iron hook in your heart. Clutch it tight and it bleeds." To end the pain, you don't wait for apology. You must remove it yourself. From that moment, Heijin turned inward. For the next 20 years, he lived anonymously, tilling soil, splitting wood, meditating at dawn and dusk. When asked why he never returned to teach publicly, he said, "If I cannot teach myself, how can I teach others?" One day a young monk expelled for anger came to him seeking refuge. For months he was irritable, harsh, even insulted Heijin repeatedly. Yet Heijin neither expelled nor lectured him. He simply invited him to observe himself through daily chores, carrying water, washing bowls, tending fire, watering plants. A year later, the young monk wept, knelt, and apologized. He asked, "Master, how did you endure me?" Heijin placed a hand on his chest and answered, "I did not endure you. I simply no longer expected you to change." That response, soft as spring breeze, carried the power to transform a life. Lesson 9. The final lesson is the lesson of return. You no longer seek someone to blame. You no longer expect the world to become softer. You no longer wait for others to change so you can feel peace. Every anger is a choice. Every expectation is a chain. Every pain, when examined, bears a trace of the ego, seeking recognition, fairness, understanding. Yet life owes none of those things. And neither can you fully understand others. Life simply unfolds. How your mind responds is your responsibility. When betrayed, yes, they are wrong. But holding on to the pain because you cannot accept the truth keeps you trapped. When someone is ungrateful, yes, they lack, but your bitterness over their lack of memory, that is what weighs you down. A truly kind soul recognizes freedom lies in not needing anyone to change for your own peace. Everything is a lesson, not because it is pleasant, but because it forces you to face yourself fully. Such a person stops waiting for life to be kind, stops demanding positive karma immediately, stops blaming fate when the dark comes, stops insisting that the world follow their moral logic. They simply live quietly, observe, love, and act with a heart unentangled, no longer tying kindness to others' transformation, no longer assigning meaning to pain needing redemption, no longer demanding validation from the world. Only one thing remains worthy of preservation: mindful peace within. Because true peace does not arise by controlling life. It arises by no longer fleeing any part of yourself. Responsibility belongs to you, not as burden, but as a key. The key to the final gate, true freedom. That story shows. The final liberation does not come from how much you can endure, forgive, or how kind you are, but from no longer identifying yourself with any of those things. When you're no longer merged with any moral identity, you become free as sky and cloud. Someone who has fully traversed the trials of goodness becomes someone who no longer thinks about goodness. They help without remembering. They step back without feeling noble. They endure without tallying credit. They live with compassion not because they believe the world will improve, but because they cannot live any other way once freed from all definition. Lesson 10 is the lesson of emptiness, where kindness is no longer an ethical function, but a natural breath of a soul unwarped by ego. In that state, there is no, "What must I do?" No, "What should I do?" No, "Am I worthy?" Every action unfolds like a cloud drifting through the sky, leaving no trace, needing no label. Only when you no longer attribute yourself to any beautiful image can you touch the true freedom of goodness. Like Ryokan, the hermit who gave away his coat and wished he could share the moon itself, you too can live lightly. Not to become someone, but to let go of the need to become anyone. That is the silent apex of someone who has lived a full life with a heart as broad as the sky. At the end of the path of a good life, you reach a point where every concept, even goodness, begins to dissolve in the silence of deep understanding. No longer, "I must live well so others become well," nor, "I do right because it's right," but simply a life lived in integrity, pure, simple, without reason. At that moment, your mind is like a still pond, reflecting all without holding on to even the image of goodness in yourself. This is the deepest layer of kindness, where every effort dissolves, leaving only pure presence, not for moral virtue, goal, or practice. If earlier lessons taught you not to react, not to cling to pain, not to expect reciprocity, the final lesson is, you no longer cling even to that non-clinging. Your mind is no longer pulled by evil, but no longer cramped by good. You no longer oppose. You no longer depend, you just live. Like a stream flowing through the mountain, asking neither why it flows nor where it ends. Legend tells of Master Yunmen of the Tang dynasty, disciplined, ascetic, strict. One day, a filthy old beggar entered the temple. The disciples wanted to chase him away, but the master allowed him to stay. That evening, Yunmen observed the beggar sitting under moonlight, smiling softly, filthy on the outside, yet profoundly at peace. He asked, "Who are you?" The beggar only smiled and said, "I am not sitting like an enlightened one, I am just sitting as myself." This threw Yunmen into shock. He stayed awake all night. Then the next morning discarded all temple rules. He told his disciples, "From now on, I will no longer teach you to be good. I just hope you will live authentically." That story became legendary, not to abolish discipline, but to point to the final truth. At some point, even moral ideals must be released so the heart can return to utter naturalness. Kindness tied to the identity, "I am good," comes with expectation and inevitable disappointment. But kindness that is shapeless, like the beggar's smile, is beyond reach. It comes not from discipline, but from ultimate letting go. Even the need to become someone. When you no longer need to be anyone else. When you no longer need recognition. When you no longer care if your actions seem noble. When each breath is itself a perfect expression of a luminous mind. Thus, Lesson 10 does not end like a typical lesson, but dissolves into vanishing, where all definitions fall away. No more, I live kindly, just, I am living. No more, I give, just, the giving occurs. No more, I walk the path of awakening, just, this step. In this place, without purpose, not cold detachment, but warmth without attachment. Not numbness, but deep feeling without expression. Not indifference, but full presence so the self has nothing left to prove. Like moonlight reflected on rivers without getting wet, someone who has transcended good and evil. Sorrow and joy, success and failure, becomes as bright as the moon and as light as a cloud. If you have reached this lesson, know you need not hold anything anymore. No need to preserve a beautiful self-image. No need to try to become a better version of yourself. No need to worry if others understand. No need to recount your pain, your efforts, or your survival. Just live, like the beggar beneath the moon. Like Yunmen after his night of awakening. Like a river that doesn't mind its destination. Like incense drifting into the air, expecting nothing as it dissolves. At that moment, you are not just a person who lives kindly. You are kindness, not a concept, but a silent, nameless presence, like a forest breeze. Mist on grass, the earth holding every footprint without reacting. Though the world remains imperfect, though your kindness is forgotten, though your path may be quiet and solitary, such silence becomes the ground of a maturing soul. Like a seed sprouting in stillness. When you no longer need to prove anything, no longer expect praise, no longer demand others change. Each breath you take becomes a blooming flower in the garden of spirit. Perhaps nobody else notices, but heaven and earth remember. Perhaps no one knows how often you have wept, but those tears watered awakening seeds in others. So if your heart has ever hurt because of being too kind, please don't close it. Let it continue beating, gentle, silent, even when unseen and unheard, because that nameless beating is what keeps the world gentle. Thank you for listening to this until the very end. If any of these small truths touched your heart, please leave a sign, a subscription, a comment, or simply a deep exhale. Silent Soul Garden will always be a place for you to return, whenever you need a space to listen to yourself. I wish you a life lived lightly, a mind at peace untouched by storms, a heart wide enough to love without bonds. Until we meet again.